From the TBW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
Welcome to Inside Olympia. For the past 4.5 years, my guest this week has helmed Washington's Criminal Justice Training Commission. Now she's preparing to step down. The CJTC is the state's police and corrections academy where new officers go to train before joining the force or going to work in jails. The CJTC is also responsible for police officers' certification and decertification in Washington and for establishing and implementing training standards. In recent years, the CJTC has been the agency responsible for implementing police reforms adopted in the wake of high-profile cases like the murder of George Floyd. It's also been expanding access to police training by creating regional academies so recruits don't have to travel so far. Joining me now, and for the full hour this week for an exit interview, is CJTC's Executive Director, Monica Alexander. Welcome back to Inside Olympia. It's good to see you.
Thank you. It's always great to see you as well.
And congratulations on this moment of transition after maybe not a long tenure, but a pretty action-packed and busy tenure, 4.5 years. We'll talk about that. I want to start with the fact that you were, well, I should note, you spent more than 20 years with the State Patrol, retired from there as a captain, so you have a long history in law enforcement. You were honored recently on the floor of the State Senate, and so we're going to watch a little bit of that just for some context for this interview. So let's go to that first.
Mr. President, if you walked up to Director Alexander today and thanked her for her extraordinary service, this is what she would say to you. She would thank you and tell you, I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing my job. So I would like to say to Director Alexander, job well done.
You know, we all have people in our lives that are like quiet heroes, and she's my quiet hero. She serves with such integrity and kindness, but she also has this courage to challenge systems that aren't working for the people who need them.
I have been asked before if I know much about comic books, and I don't, but I do know much about superheroes. I have not worked directly with Captain Alexander, Executive Director Alexander, but I have watched her from afar. She has mentored me without knowing it, and I am just so grateful.
This is a position that has great authority, great responsibility, great impact, great influence in our state, having to do with all matters of public safety. And yet Director Alexander has done all of this having a humble presentation, a very balanced demeanor, and quite frankly, when you listen to what she's saying, she has a sense of vision, which is just an absolute value to an organization like this, a sense of where we should be going.
Would Director Alexander please stand and receive the deep appreciation of the Washington State Senate for your service?
So I got to ask, what was that moment like?
You know, you got me, Austin. It was very emotional. It was, Senator Lovick is such a trickster that I didn't recognize that was what was happening when I arrived there.
Is that right? You didn't know? We should note he's also a retired State Patrol.
He is. And he's been a dear friend, not just of mine, but of the state of Washington, of CJTC. He's done, just so much work. But he asked me to come down and speak to the caucus and give them an update on what was going on with the regional academies, because that is really his passion project, and he's been along my side opening those up. So when he asked me to go in the gallery until they dismissed for caucus, and I thought, okay. And so the first thing they talked about was blood donations. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. One of the senators stood up and talked about his wife receiving blood and how important it was. And then the next thing on the docket was, well, here's the other thing. About 15 members of my staff were sitting there with me. So when I arrived there, I just didn't understand why they were there. Like, why
aren't you all back at work?
Right. That's what I said to them. I thought you were working. What is happening right now? And they just looked at me like, if we don't look straight at her, then she won't see us either. So they thought they were invisible. Anyway, then the next thing was them talking about this resolution. And that was a huge deal that was unexpected but greatly appreciated. And every time I look at it, which I've looked at it multiple times, it makes me emotional because I enjoyed the work that I've had the honor to do, not just at CJTC, but also with the State Patrol, and it is truly an honor.
And we should note that you are well known in the legislative environment because when you were at State Patrol, you were their government relations lead.
Correct.
Spent a lot of time, and you worked on signature projects, including the backlog of sexual assault kits, on the missing endangered indigenous people, and so you had sort of the broader portfolio as well as these very specific legacy projects you worked on. I do want to just note a couple of other things about your bio, and this was noted in the Senate resolution, but I think it's important to, for context and to also just acknowledge your long history in law enforcement. You were, for a time, people may recognize you from your Como TV traffic days. You would actually go in uniform.
Yes.
That might be the first time before I met you, kind of was aware of you, but you'd be in uniform doing traffic with Como. That was sort of a unique situation that the State Patrol and Como came together and agreed that you could do that. So you were a TV star for a while. You also placed #1 on the sergeant's exam in 2003 and became the first African-American woman to be promoted to sergeant, lieutenant, and captain with the Washington State Patrol. So a real trailblazer in that agency.
Yes.
Yeah. And then moved on to CJTC, 4.5 years. And I think for purposes of this conversation, it's important that people understand that the CJTC has been around since the 1970s, but just in the last several years, the portfolio and the responsibilities have grown tremendously in this environment of trying to reform policing,
Yes.
trying to make it more accountable to the public. So help us understand kind of when you walked in the door, took over this agency, the moment in history that you were kind of encountering and the role of that agency in trying to make change.
So,
Because it wasn't as simple as just, you got to train the recruits. I mean, that's a hard enough job.
right. And it really is, and it's a really serious job, and it's something that I take very seriously. I take my training seriously and what I'm passing along to the next generation of law enforcement. But everything was changing. George Floyd happened, and people were really, really upset, and not just in Washington, all over the United States. And, people were saying to us, well, it didn't happen here, so why are we responding? Why are we reacting? And my thing is that we can always stand to improve. And it doesn't mean that everything that law enforcement was doing was wrong. I didn't want them to take that position. It was that we can improve. And we were looking at 5051, which had everything to do with the makeup of the commission, certification, what people could be revoked for. All of those things were hot buttons, and people were hot. And, law enforcement was upset because they felt like they were being picked on. The community was upset because they felt like there wasn't enough accountability. And how do you stand in that gap? Because I respect both. I love the community. That's why I joined law enforcement, and I love law enforcement. But that doesn't mean that we can not make changes. We can still make changes.
So I want to we'll delve into some of the different roles and kind of how you navigated that. But I think that term "stepping into the gap" is a really interesting one. So I think the story of your tenure is that the CJTC has experienced a significant increase in responsibility and training demands in the past 4.5 years. But how did you navigate that when you've got a community that may not trust law enforcement in many cases and instances, and law enforcement feeling like its back is up against a wall? How did you navigate just that environment before you even have to go, start to get these initiatives going?
By being open, by really caring, and by listening. I really believe in listening. And so when our community members, some of them that I knew when I was in the State Patrol, that were working on I-940.
Which was the use of force initiative.
Yes.
Back in 2018, I think.
Yes,
yeah. And
I didn't retire until 2019. And so I knew some of the advocates and some of the people that were activists and that wanted things to change. So I knew them already. And so when I took over CJTC, and clearly I knew a lot of the chiefs and sheriffs and the police, when I took over CJTC, my commitment was to be able to openly listen to everyone, because I thought everyone deserved a voice. And I sat down with some people, Joyce Brecky, Leslie Cushman. I let them know their voice was absolutely welcomed. And it still is.
And these are leaders in the police reform movement.
That's exactly right. And you know, Leslie Cushman wrote I-940. Leslie Cushman was always around trying to make changes and being a voice for the people. Well, I also wanted to listen to law enforcement. So you don't have to choose. You listen to everyone. And that's what standing in the gap is you're recognizing that there's some good points and good things happening from both sides. And how do you bring those things together? Because there's also a lot of emotion and a lack of trust. You know, it just takes a hair for people to go, see, I don't trust them because look what they did or look what they said. And I was not looking for that. I was looking for, how do we bridge the gap? How do we build that bridge to one another?
Well, since we're on this subject, where would you say we are today versus when you started in this role on that question? How big is that gap today?
I think the gap is smaller. I think it still exists, and it doesn't take much to push people's buttons, especially during the legislative session, because that's when things get really heated up, because people throw bills out there, and people don't like them, right? Because people don't really like reform. They don't want to necessarily make big sweeping changes. I get that too.
There's a bill right now about sheriffs that's getting a lot of
attention.
A lot of attention, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And accountability specifically for them. Yeah.
Yes. But I just think that again, starting with listening and not necessarily agreeing with everything that everyone says. I don't have to do that, and I'm not a puppet. I bring my own brain to every conversation, but I also know that there are things that make me go, I didn't think about that. But I do try to think about it from the perspective of people that have been harmed. I think of Fred and Annalisa Thomas. And when I first started at CJTC, I wanted to know their story. I knew their story from the newspaper, but I wanted to know their story from them. And they gave me a huge gift, and I thank them regularly for it.
And their son was killed by a police officer.
Yes.
And they've been very active. Fred, I believe, is on the Office of Independent Investigations Oversight Commission.
They are. He is. And Annalisa Thomas is one of our commissioners for CJTC, and that happened after I became a part of CJTC. And when the reform of the panel came along.
So let me ask you about that, because I wanted to note that there's a reason we call it a commission, is because there's actually a commission that oversees it. It's now 21 members. It was not always the case.
No, it was not always the case, but they added a few members, and they added impacted family members, community members. It's a really big mix of people, which is really a good thing again.
The idea being that this is the commission that is overseeing training of police officers in this state and accountability of police officers in this state, and that it should be reflective not just of the law enforcement community, but the community at large.
That's exactly right. And before, it was predominantly law enforcement, and the whole thing was to even that up a little bit. And there's still law enforcement. The Attorney General's office still has a seat on there, community members, impacted family members. But when Fred and Annalisa told me their entire story of what happened the day their son was killed, they relived that whole thing. I took that as a gift, absolutely, because I never heard it from their perspective. So I keep that information with me, and I want to make sure that people like Fred and Annalisa Thomas are heard. And, you know, they talk to me regularly. They're not anti-police, though. People would want to believe or think that. They are absolutely not. They're very supportive of police. They just want to make sure that accountability is in place for police officers that aren't doing the right thing.
So the gap maybe is narrower, but as you note, it's tenuous. It can change on a dime depending on what's happening. There was also a huge attrition out of law enforcement. I mean, Seattle Police Department was sort of Exhibit A of this. And recruiting people into this profession became very difficult. So where do things stand now on that front? Has recruitment bounced back? What is the trend line? Who's joining police departments these days?
It's really amazing. I just met with a new class today, and I get a chance to meet with every class on their first day. I don't get to see them. I see them in the hallways in Burien, but the classes like in Pasco and Vancouver and Spokane.
Which are
and
these
Arlington,
new satellite locations?
Yes. I don't get to see them except on their first day. I show up on the first day because for me it's really important to know their why. I like those questions is who's joining? Yeah. Medical professionals, dental hygienists, pastors, community members, people that have had a long 20 years in the military. So it's a whole lot. Teachers, principals. All of these, yeah, it's so fascinating because they bring a completely different lens to this work. A lot of parents, people that have not only just young children, we have some that have adult children. They said, I just want to show my kid I could do this. I could be a part of the community and be in law enforcement. And it was always a lifelong dream, but couldn't do it when their kids were small. And so people, I heard this a lot. No one wants to be a cop. And I said, well, I have an 8-month backup to say that's not true. So before we opened up the regional academies, it would take 8 to 12 months to get into the academy after you were hired.
Which was causing a lot of problems for the departments.
Absolutely, a lot of problems and a lot of emails from me, from chiefs and sheriffs.
And that backlog, as I understand it, has now been essentially eliminated.
Essentially.
I want to get back to that in a moment, but just sticking with this idea of police recruiting, are you noticing, you acknowledge sort of a diversity of backgrounds. What about just racial diversity, gender diversity, bringing more women into this profession, more people of color? Are you noticing these classes more reflective of the community at large?
So it feels like it ebbs and flows. It feels like we had one class last year that had 10 females. That's a third of the class were female. And you could feel the difference, the confidence in the class. And I talked to them, and they said, we were committed to either the president or vice president was going to be female. If we're the third of the class, then we're going to represent. And I loved it. But now I see where we don't have nearly as many women as I thought I would see come through. The class that I met with today only had 2 females. I was kind of disappointed in that it was 2 females. But as far as racial diversity, we also see a lot of diversity in racial diversity. And I'm happy about that. And, I had this conversation with my son yesterday where, he's like, well, we focus so much on, race. And I said, everyone does. Consciously or subconsciously, everyone does. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's a negative. And it doesn't mean there aren't qualified people out there. But it is lonely being the only. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
from
you have
experience.
You have some direct experience with that.
Yeah.
What the mission of the CJTC is training the guardians of democracy. What does that mean? And then the corollary question that I wrote down is, what about when they need to be warriors and not just guardians?
And so what it means is democracy is really important we talk about it all the time. We talk about how people should have their freedoms and how do we protect people's freedoms. And sometimes people's freedoms feel like they're stepping on our toes. But when we take away people's freedoms to feel a certain way, everyone doesn't have to like me. But that doesn't mean you can just walk up and bump me on the head either. But you don't have to like me. So as long as I'm protected from physical harm, you can go ahead and dislike me. But I think that one of the things we have to remember is we all aren't going to think the same, and that is our protections. But then when you talk about how do we hold accountable, right, for the ones that don't get it quite right, there's a process. And I know that people think, oh, so then when they don't do it right, all of a sudden and automatically Monica or Director Alexander is going to take away their right to be a police officer. Well, not necessarily. There is a process. And my desk is the last stop. I have to do the final signature.
And we're talking about when you decertify somebody.
Yes.
and tell them they can't work in law enforcement anymore.
Right.
Or discipline them and temporarily pull their certification or whatever the case may be.
Any of those things.
Yeah.
But my desk is the last stop. There is a hearing process where they get to be heard by, there's police officers there's community members, there's professors. So there's several people that make up that panel. And they're objective. They are very objective. And sometimes the police officers are harder on other police officers than community members. They're like, oh, we don't know if we want to revoke them over this. Maybe they can have some retraining, or maybe they can have a suspension. So there are options. So I don't make those decisions in a vacuum all by myself. That's not my decision. That is a collective decision.
Well, let me get back to this idea of training the guardians of democracy versus preparing them for what you hope maybe they'll never encounter, but given the nature of police work, they very likely will encounter, which is moments of life and death. Mm-hmm. Moments where they do have to be brave enough to and trained enough to go into a school where there's an active shooter, mm-hmm. or respond in the moment in a tense and violent situation. I'm just curious about sort of the philosophy at CJTC of training people who will be defenders of the Constitution, right? Mm-hmm. Upholding kind of democratic principles, good community, or, members, good representatives of their department, but on a dime can switch into some mode that, the rest of us civilians probably aren't prepared to do. How do you do that?
With a lot of time and a lot of commitment to them so that they know they have the tools to protect themselves, but it is dangerous. It is a dangerous job. And I believe that they know that based on all that have come before them. We have the memorial wall. They know those names are on there because something bad happened. Either someone is shot, stabbed, run over by a vehicle. All of those things happen. And I will be honest with you, even to this moment, every time one of those things happen, it shakes me to my absolute core, because you don't want to see it happen. And I also say there, but for the grace of God, go I. I made it out alive, and everybody doesn't. And those recruits and soon-to-be police officers know that that is a risk they take. But we try to teach them enough skills to protect themselves, to know when to back out and wait for backup. You don't have to be a hero. Now, you talk about an active shooter. That is a whole nother ballgame. If something is absolutely unfolding before your eyes, you have to step in. You have to do something. And it is scary. And the first thing you have to know is it's okay to say, this is scary, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to use my training.
Okay, let's move on to some of these specifics and some of the legacy pieces that you put in place and now are leaving for your successor. One is these regional academies. You noted it was a priority of Senator Lovick. The agencies wanted more options, closer to home options, but they also wanted more throughput, more of a pipeline. So regional academies now in Arlington, Vancouver, Spokane, and Pasco, plus the Berrien headquarters. What's been the effect? And especially, what has it meant in terms of throughput?
So the effect has been that people are not sitting around after they get hired waiting for 8 to 12 months to actually start the academy, because then after that, the academy is 4.5 months. And then after that, they have field training. So, waiting 2 years to fill spots that were desperately needed right then, it was necessary. Now, I'll be 100% honest. When that idea first came to me from Senator Lovick, I was not saying, yes, let's do this. All I could think of is, how do we do this?
The logistical implications seem really
absolutely
hard.
It is very hard. It is hard still.
You have to find the places. You have to get the staff. You have to have the quality control.
Yes, and the quality control is the big part of it.
And it's not just classrooms. I imagine you have to have...
It's a gym. You have to know where they're going to drive. Right. Where are they going to shoot?
Yeah.
All these things. And people just think, hey, just go in there and we just need a classroom. This is not regular college. This is a place. And firearms training is one of the most difficult, finding a range that is well maintained, and not just the static range, because we move and shoot. We teach the recruits how to find cover and still have to maybe fire on a target. There's a lot of things that we have to teach. So it was not just, okay, yeah, sure, let's do this. But I had to think about it. And Senator Lovick left, and then I called him to come back and so we could have the conversation about, how do we do this? And he's like, well, I don't know, but we just start talking about it. Let's talk about it and figure it out. And we did. And we are where we are now. And I'm happy we are.
And so what is the wait time now?
So probably 30 to 45 days after hire, which is really reasonable because the agencies have to onboard them, get them outfitted for all the things that they need for the academy, get them prepared for their families. Hey, this is what's going on. So that time, that wait time is actually reasonable.
And for a department like Seattle Police, SPD, they've been trying to, obviously they lost so many, they're the largest. They're trying to hire a lot of people. Have you been able to help, has CJTC been able to help them climb out of their deficit and kind of meet their demands? Because they could probably fill a good chunk of a class.
They do fill a big chunk of the class. Often I'll say, when SPD comes in, I go, so nice of you to let other people join the class because they have 15, which is half the class. Yeah. But I have committed to Chief Barnes that if in fact he can get 30 people at once ready to go into a class, I will create a class for him. Absolutely.
Is there anything that imperils this 30 to 40 day wait period right now?
So in Arlington, it's a little more, for whatever reason, it's been a little more difficult. They say their people are waiting longer, but we've been able to do it in Vancouver and Pasco and Spokane where they're not waiting longer. So we are trying to figure out what is different in Arlington than in those other locations. Honestly, if I would have opened up Arlington first, I would have been really discouraged because of the hiccups that we've had, not because of the people, but because I don't understand. I can't figure out why their people are waiting so long where we're not having that problem in our other locations.
Otherwise, has this regional academy approach, maybe it's still early days, but would you deem it a success?
It's not early days. We've had a lot of classes go through, and I would. And honestly, I feel like it's such a success that when you say that, I kind of want to flex a little bit.
Okay. You can do that. And Senator Lovick was right.
He was 100% right with his idea, and I've told him multiple times that I'm honored to have worked with him on this project because he was 100% right.
Okay, let's take a quick break. When we return, we continue our exit interview with Monica Alexander, Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Training Commission. Back after this.
Stolen vehicles are a problem. We need a solution. Pursuits are not the solution to that.
Just hit another vehicle.
With the current pursuit law, you could literally have someone steal a vehicle and drive through a school zone actively at 100 miles an hour back and forth, and no one will be able to do anything about that.
Passing by school.
Welcome back to Inside Olympia. Joining me once again is Monica Alexander, who is preparing to step down after 4.5 years as the Executive Director of Washington's Criminal Justice Training Commission. I do want to ask you just again to kind of help us understand this world of training up the next generation of law enforcement. Do you know off the top of your head what percentage of recruits make it all the way through, like what the graduation rates are, the retention rates? I would think that there might be some percentage of people who get to that point and they thought this was right for them, but there's a lot of hoops to jump through to graduate and might realize it's just not for them. So I'm kind of curious about the attrition out of the academy, what you're noticing.
Numbers are pretty high, and I really wish I had a specific number for you, but most people, and one of the things I tell them on their first day, this is not your job, this is the training for the job you're going to do, which training is not always that much fun. Sometimes it's fun, some people love it, but I ask them to get all the way through the process and graduate, go on your field training, then you decide whether or not this is for you. Academically, we don't have a lot of people fail, and there's a couple of reasons for that. You have 3 opportunities to take a test before you get, and that's collectively, so you can't just keep failing and redoing it. We don't give them the same test, so no, it's not like they memorized it, but we will help them. The instructors, the people that are there, that are currently police officers that are on contract for us, they do a fantastic job. They care so much. They're out. If people are nervous about driving, and driving is different now than it used to be. We used to, couldn't wait to get our driver's license. Young people aren't the same anymore. So sometimes they've just gotten a driver's license, and we're asking them to do a skill course and go out to the state patrol and drive fast and slam on the brakes and hit big water puddles and lose control of the car. It's pretty intimidating. Yeah. But we have an instructor there that just is very committed to driving. And he does a really, really good job at getting them through and getting them prepared. Our firearms team will stay after. They're some of the best instructors there are. They will stay after and help. So people don't normally leave the academy because they can't get through the skills or the academics.
What about, do you see the academy, though, as an opportunity to identify people who just won't make good police officers? Maybe they don't have the personality for it. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're going to go out there and make that gap that you're trying to narrow wider.
Yes, we do see that, and this is a great opportunity for us to identify it. And what we do is we send them back to their agency. I don't have the ability to fire or hire, but I do have the ability to ask them to leave the academy, and we call their agency and ask them to let them know either come get them or we're sending them back to you, and you do what you want to do with them. And most often we'll have an investigation based on what the person has done. We have an in-house investigation team. They'll do an investigation, and then we give that to the agency.
Did I read correctly that there was a rewrite of the CJTC curriculum in 2024?
It is almost done.
Almost done. So help us understand what that rewrite, kind of big picture, is trying to accomplish.
So all of the laws that have been passed, all of the new things that we're trying to incorporate, and I'll give you an example, the Attorney General's use of force policy, model policy. Our defensive tactics, the person that leads our CDT, he worked with the Attorney General's office, and I call it putting words to the music. So the use of force model policy was written, and now he has to incorporate and say, this is how we're going to implement it in basic training. And so he has done a fantastic job at doing that. But that was just one piece of it. There are other things, laws that have been changed that needed to be incorporated. But some of the things that were happening before we got there, and I say we, the team that is there now, is that we needed to make sure that our curriculum is being taught. You talked about it initially, quality control all over the state. We can't just have someone walk in with their own thumb drive and teach what they want to teach. That is not accountability. And I need
to be consistent.
Absolutely.
Everybody's got to be seeing and learning the same things.
Yes.
Will the nature, once this is complete, will the actual experience be different, or are the fundamentals pretty much staying in place and it's kind of what's being taught versus how it's being taught?
I think the experience is already different than it was, say, 10 years ago. It is definitely different. And one of the things that makes me laugh every time, because I was teased about smiling so much when I was in the academy, but one of the things that makes me smile is Rich Peterson, who's our lead in our CDT program. He always, when I listen to him instruct, he goes, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to smile. And so who thinks about that with defensive tactics? He goes, because what we're trying to do is de-escalate, and smiling de-escalates people. Now, I don't ever remember anyone telling me to smile when I was in the State Patrol Academy. It was just, I was a smiley person, and I was kind of teased about it. But Rich tells them, smile. You know, let them see your hands. You're going to want to see their hands. And so just the way he's instructing is very different than what I remember being taught.
There is a curriculum on the history of race in policing, and rather than ask you specifically about that, I want to ask you kind of a bigger picture question about what you feel you've brought to the academy, given your long tenure with WSP, your experience as an officer and as a citizen and as an African-American woman. How do you think kind of what goes on at this academy has been influenced by you and your lived experience?
So that's a loaded question. I think part of what I bring just as a person of fairness, I don't want to make big sweeping assumptions about people, just like I don't want them to make them about me. I want to hear people. I always bring my ear to every conversation, and I try to listen more than I talk. You wouldn't know that by today, by all this talking I'm doing, but I'm so excited to talk about CJTC. But I try to listen to where people are coming from, and I try to recognize that everybody doesn't have as many lenses as I have. Everyone isn't an African-American female that grew up in a community where there was a lot of diversity. So I grew up around a lot of diversity. I love it and appreciate it. I love how many languages are spoken in our country, and I want more of them to be spoken in policing, because guess what? We're going to come in contact with so many people, and I will never forget how handicapped I felt when I would come in contact with someone that didn't speak the language that I speak, and I didn't speak the language that they spoke.
It creates an immediate barrier.
Absolutely.
Just give us a flavor of what you tell the recruits on that first day when you meet with them.
Well, first of all, I ask them, because I'm listening. I ask their why.
Why are you here?
Why are you here? I always let them know, I'm happy you're here, but why? Mm-hmm. Because they need to hear their own why. But then I also tell them about damaging the badge. how easy it is to damage the badge. And it doesn't matter what color your uniform is or what patches on your sleeve. We are all in this game together. And I love sports, so I always use sports analogies. And I said, sports teams, if they don't play together, you can tell because they lose. But those that play together and support one another, they win. And winning means we're all protecting our communities love us, we love our communities, and we're all feeling safer. Because an officer is safer if the community loves him or her.
I noticed that you survey these academy graduates, 46% say they are well prepared, 40% say adequately prepared. What do you think is reflected in those numbers, or what would be needed to get them higher? I'm sure you'd love to see 90% walking out of this 4-month academy saying, I am understanding they're not ready to do everything. They got to do their field training still, but well prepared for this career. What's going on there in terms of those numbers? You combine them and you're over 80, but well prepared is probably the mark you want?
Absolutely is the mark we want. I think time. It's about time. We have 720 hours, and that is, we pack so much into that. And think about this. That includes practice for graduation, all the lunches that they have to have, all the breaks that they have to have. We need more time.
Is there any talk of that, of extending, making it a 6-month academy? I mean, I know that would cost more. But.
It would cost more. And right this minute, no. But asking me that question, that is what I would make the suggestion of. We need to slow things down, give them more reps, more time. One of the things that I was looking for was, while I was at CJTC, was a new academy. And the reason I wanted the new academy was because I wanted more repetition. Repetition helps an officer to feel more confident in their work. So now we're looking at going to VR, virtual reality training.
I saw that. So how's that working?
So I don't have the money,
okay.
but I want the money.
So you piloted it in
Arlington.
In Arlington, yeah.
Yes, and it's really good.
It's
and
scenario-based?
It's scenario-based. We can also do taser training with it. It doesn't take away from the live taser training.
But they actually put on the VR goggles.
Yes. And the recruits have said it is so helpful because they can do it in the class. They can do it anywhere. So that reduces the footprint, right? Because right now we need so much more space. But if we can go to VR where we don't need as much space, but they're still getting a ton of repetition. And it's not, people always think that so much of our training is just about fighting, shooting, and driving. It's not. It's also about just interaction with community. There's one scenario that every time I watch it, it makes me a little misty because it's about an autistic young man. And the person in the video is actually autistic, and his dad running into the scene, and how the officers are responding. And we can change those responses based on trying to train them and teach them. Those VRs will be life-changing for officers, and I think we could get our response up that way. And again, it's about $1.7 million to outfit all of the academies. And again, as I talked to you about, we want to be consistent with all of the academies. If one academy gets the training, we want all of them to get it.
Well, let me just hit a couple of things that have been in the news. One is AI is obviously changing education. It's also letting people cheat. I understand there have been a couple of incidents at the CJTC, one involving someone using Meta glasses to try to augment their grades, and then another who used ChatGPT to write a memo. What are you noticing, and how are you guys having to adjust to these new AI tools?
Well, I think that what we're noticing is, yes, we've had a couple of incidents, but we haven't had a lot. And when you think about how many people are going through the academy and how few incidents we've had, what I want people to do is go through the steps so you're really learning. If you try to skip the steps, you're not really learning. And that's going to show up when you go out there on the street.
This is what every teacher says, right? You're shortchanging yourself.
You are.
But
Absolutely.
Here, the stakes are really high.
They're so high because it is life or death. It is a lawsuit. It is you getting in trouble because you don't really know the work. It is so much better to do the work, spend the hours.
Are you guys having these classes come in, having to have the conversation?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The conversation